start. One is that I have Mercury at 3 degrees of Capricorn, and looking around here this afternoon, I could start to talk about anything. So if I just walked off out the window somewhere, gently, nothing loud please, no abuse, no swearing, gently remind me that I'm meant to be talking about astrology. I don't know whether I'm jet lagged or spaced out or what, but it's been a bit of fun. Another thing is I'd like to say is that I heard Bernadette ask if anybody had income jumps at her lecture. So I said, well, I guess I could get up here and ask if anyone had an ascendant. And she said, well, I could put my hand up and say, well, no, I haven't, and that might throw a bit of excitement into the work. But I decided that wouldn't work either. So it's time to get into the stacking, and actually do something. When I first got into astrology, the ascendant was a real mystery to me. I mean, I had learned this and I had learned that, and I knew it all up here. Right. But there was something that didn't quite gel. We read about the ascendant and what we tell our students and our classes and our clients is that it can be a defense mechanism. It's where we go when we're afraid, we're insecure, our persona, our mask, how we want people to perceive us. But it never really seemed to me to explain what the point of the ascendant actually was. And as I was doing classes and talking with people and private consultations, I became more aware that in some way the ascendant had direct relevance to the past, but in some way also was moving toward the future. It's the point where the soul enters, in my opinion, its first communication with life is the ascendant. So it's a very, very important point. What we're going to deal with today is just 3 things. Now, we all know that when we're doing a chart, when we're doing a consultation, you have to take into account the whole picture. But that's one of the greatest, I think, frustrations of lecturing, is that when we're lecturing, we've got an hour and a half, we can only take part of. So please remember that we're only dealing with part of, not the whole picture, which of course we know we have to do when we're doing a chart. So what I'm going to be dealing with in the next hour or so is the 12th house, the first house, and the second house cups. Okay? What signs you've got on those cups and what it means. Now there's many things we think about the 12th house. What I became clear of with the clients I was seeing, that for instance, say they were Capricorn rising, that they had a direct affinity with the sign on the 12th house cup. Now it doesn't mean to say if you've got Capricorn rising you were a Sagittarian last time round. What it does mean, I believe, is that you've got a real affinity and innate understanding of what the energy of Sagittarius is all about. Capricorn risings aren't chasing freedom. It is not an issue for them. They know what they've been in. They know what they dealt with last time round. What they're dealing with now is taking the ideals and ethics of Sagittarius, creating it into the form that is Capricorn, in readiness to move on to the scrutiny that can be Aquarius, to take that form and structure and assimilate the usefulness of the ideas that can be Aquarius. And that's what they're learning, that's what they're moving towards. So it's more or less we're coming from the 12th house cusp. That's the energy we come in on, the unconscious memory of what that energy is. We're only learning about the ascendant. We're learning to do that energy. And we're moving toward the second house cusp. And it's not until a progressed ascendant, okay, just a degree here, moves over that second house cusp that you're really going to know what that ascendant means. Now obviously if you've got an intercepted first house, you're going to spend a lot of time before you find out who you are. Hasn't happened to me, it's perfectly apparent. I used to say that I didn't know who I was and I worried about it, and now I don't know who I am and I don't worry about it anymore. I sort of figure I'll wait till a progressed ascendant moves over that second house cusp. But, well, it's my excuse anyway, I'm sticking to it. But it's like when it comes over, you've got a much clearer idea of what that ascendant is and what you have learned and what you're incorporating and assimilating.
It's got into 12.
Yeah, okay. The subject of intersections. It tends to suggest that there's a building block that's been passed over, that you haven't really learned that energy of the intersection. Right? That maybe you had problems with the energy of the ascendant. You can either not deal with it directly, not deal with it at all, or you think can become so caught up in it that you don't go anywhere. Zipper Dobbins calls it being trapped in the ascendant, where you're so afraid of the future and change and movement that you don't do anything but come from that ascendant. and explore your whole world through that ascending point. And that's very much what I believe happens with an intercepted 12th house, that there's a building block being skipped over somewhere. But you still have to go back, if you like, and it just gives you a double whammy of what we're learning on that level this time. So that's basically what I want to talk about. I just want to go through the signs. I want to talk about the sign on the ascendant. Please, if any of you have got anything to say, don't hesitate to interject, ask questions, whatever. I'm not particularly good at standing up here for an hour and a half and talking at people. So if you've got anything to say, please do. So when we're talking about, if we come in at that point, that soul's first communication with life is Aries rising. What are we coming in with if we've got Aries rising? What do we perceive Aries rising to be? It's like we perceive them to be pushy, aggressive, upfront, insensitive. Where are they coming from? They're coming from Pisces. It's not, I always felt very uncomfortable, and it could be that I'm a fire sign, but I always felt very uncomfortable when people or authors or whatever suggest that fire isn't sensitive, right? You take the 3 fire signs, and I guess any of you that aren't fire signs would say, yes, please, take them. But Aries, Leo, Sagittarius, what have they got on the 12th house cusp? Pisces, Cancer, Scorpio. They know about sensitivity, they've been there. There's no one like a fire sign that can pick up subtle manipulation quicker. It's like inbuilt radar. They know it, they can pick it a mile off. It's because they're so damn good at it themselves. They've done it, they know it, they've learned it. Thank you. And this time around they're desperate to get out of that pattern. So Aries rising is pushing their way out. Alan Oaken says in his book, I don't know whether you have read his complete astrology, Aries, I seek myself. With Aries rising, that's what they're learning to do, and they can't afford. I know a lot of you will be saying, hey, wait. The 12th house is the house of our greatest fears. That's exactly why we can't afford to be sucked back to that more negative vibration of our unconscious memory with that rising sign. So when Aries rising is pushing forward all the time, what they're actually saying is, I don't want to be drawn back to that collective sea of Pisces. I need to push forward. I need to learn to be assertive. I need to learn to be aggressive. I need to stand up for myself and discover the identity that I didn't really know I had. You know, which of course we all know in Aries, that the continual fight all through life and struggle is to find some sort of identity. So that's what we're coming in with Aries rising. And it's like, no, I'll wait. I'll wait till I get on. But they're moving toward Taurus on the 2nd house cusp. What they're going to learn to do is take that action. Take the action and create the stability that is Taurus. And they will do that. We do with our rising sign. But it takes time. And a lot of us get very impatient. If you've got Aries rising, you certainly get very impatient. Okay, so it does take that time for the progressed ascendant to move over that 2nd house cusp. Wherever Aries is placed in your chart is the point of self. Okay? And if you've got Aries intercepted, you're going to spend a lot of time searching for who you are. And of course it depends on what house it's in and everything else, where you're going to do that searching. But search you will if you've got Aries intercepted at any point in your chart. With Aries rising, it's like, we've got to be very brave to come in with Aries rising. We're starting the cycle all over again. Buzz Myers has a book, I think he calls it the Astrological Discourse, which is the only information I've ever seen on the Ascendant that really deals with it in a way that made me happy. Okay, and that's what I've drawn a lot of this information from. And he explained it and said, well, you know, with Aries, we're starting the cycle again. We've been through the cycle, we're starting again. And he sort of said you have to be very brave to come in with Aries rising. I sort of feel it's the same old Aries thing, you know, an accident going somewhere to happen and they land up here and think, God, I'll start it all over again. But you've got to do it. Okay, and it's the start of the new cycle. And they will move toward that Taurus vibration. With Taurus rising, when you come in with Taurus rising, what do we think Taurus rising people are? Normally we think they're fairly secure, stable, practical, solid as a rock, always there. It's all very true, but what sits behind it? What sits behind Taurus on the 12th house is Aries? And if you know any Taurus rising people, you know there's a lot of aggression sits behind Taurus rising. And it's not necessarily the Aries on the 12th that's aggressive, it's the memory, the unconscious memory of the past. Where there could have been violence in their life, they might have, they could have been in the military. There's many, many things. You all know what we can do with that Aries vibration. But it's that unconscious memory that sits there with Taurus, and it's because it's 12th house, it's very covert. It's very just under the surface all the time. So with Taurus, we're learning to be stable. We're learning about repeated patterns that we can build productivity on. Okay, we're learning. We're coming away from the fear of lack of identity with Aries. We're learning to be more stable. We're learning to create that productivity. We're learning about senses. Can I taste it, touch it, see it, smell it, hear it? It's all Taurus. If I can't, I don't want to know. It's been through the fire. Okay, it needs the practicality that is Taurus, the sensuality that is Taurus. And then it needs to take that. It needs to take the action of Aries, the productivity of Taurus, and move it into the communication that's Gemini. We can't, it's like if we're learning about Taurus, it's very easy to get stuck. Alright, it's very easy to stay in one place. We all know that Taurus energy. We know that it takes a hell of a long time for Taurus to make up their mind about anything, the energy of Taurus. It can take a long, long time. But once they do it, once they make up their mind, you've got to get out of their way. Because it's like they couldn't even stop themselves if they wanted. There's a momentum that builds up and it has to be completed. So what they have to do then is take that power that is Taurus, if you like, and move it into the more they need to communicate what they've learned. They need to communicate that in Gemini. Okay? When we come in with Gemini rising, we have learned about security. We have learned about money, or we should have. If we haven't and we've got Gemini rising, we're going to have big issues about money. But if we've learned the lessons around money, the Gemini rising can come up with more ideas about money-making ventures than any other sign in the zodiac. Ask a Gemini rising if you want to make some money. The schemes they've got is fascinating. Whether or not they actually do it's another thing, but they can certainly come up with the ideas. They prefer someone else to do it. They can be they're the salespeople of the zodiac. They've learned about money. They know what it's all about. There can also be the fear that it will go away. If they didn't learn that lesson properly in Taurus, there's a real fear that it will go away. So what's happening with Gemini is they're so afraid. If we've got Gemini rising, you're so afraid of being sucked back into that stability of Taurus where you fear that you might not go anywhere, that the mind scatters off in a million different directions. It's difficult to stay in one place because of that fear of being drawn back. That's why Gemini risings can often see, you know what they're like. You know what they're like. I really have to talk to you about something important. Sure, I just have to answer the phone or the door or go to a party or whatever. The important doesn't matter. They don't want to get caught up in that. It's because of that unconscious fear of being drawn back to that, of being the rock for everyone, of always being there. They don't want to get into that again. I mean, how many people can you communicate with? Millions if you're a Gemini rising. They don't want to get back into that stability of Taurus. But they do have to learn how to use that. Okay? They do have to learn that you can't be scattered all the time. What are they going towards? When they've learned to take the earth sensuality, if you like, of Taurus, to combine it with the mental air capacity that they're learning in Gemini, they then need to assimilate that with the emotional sensitivity that's Cancer. That's what they're moving towards. That's what they're learning. And it's like, that's another thing I get uncomfortable with, that air is insensitive or that air is not emotional. No such thing. They're terrified of their emotions. They don't quite know. If we've got an air rising sign, emotions are just an idea at the moment. You don't really know about that emotion. You're terrified of it. Okay? So it's certainly not that air rising is unfeeling or insensitive or unemotional. In fact, I find it exactly the opposite. But they do find it at times difficult to assimilate that with that mental air capacity and the emotionality that's so important. So what Gemini rising is learning to do is to move toward that, move toward assimilating that in Cancer. How many Gemini risings do we have in the room? I mean, I was going to say they're probably all off doing something else. Seeming to sit still for now is a bit ridiculous. Is anyone willing to share with us how they feel about that Cancer energy? If you've got Gemini rising. Oh, right. She's just arrived. Are you staying long? A sentence, if you've got time, would be wonderful.
I started out, I've done 3 now.
There is such a thing as synchronicity. It does exist.
I felt that if I wasn't specifically drawn to one, I would pick the chick out of 3. Does it describe the energy?
Yes, the actual question I asked was, how do you feel? What I was saying, did you hear what I said about Gemini rising?
Well, you're asking about the Cancer.
How do you feel about the Cancer vibration, or about the energy, that Cancerian energy?
Well, probably in my case, the Cancer energy is intense because I've got...
You've got it elsewhere.
Uranus in the first house. So I started Gemini feeling very strongly oriented towards the Cancer. And the combination of the two, you get the Gemini that wants to investigate everything. But the Cancer thing kind of picks up on the feel of what you're doing. But you keep antennae out. But that's subtle.
Yeah, it's just interesting because it's almost like the combining of that. If we've got then, we go into Cancer rising. They know about the mental gymnastics. Cancer rising has been there before. And it's almost like there's this strange loop that goes on between Gemini, Cancer, Cancer, Gemini. More so, in my experience from what I've seen, than, and we all know anyway, if we've got the Sun in Gemini, we're likely to have heavy Cancer emphasis anyway. But more so with those two signs, I see a lot. Leo comes into it a lot too, but more so with those two signs. So if we've got Gemini rising, it's difficult for us. The mixture of air and water are the two most difficult to marry. Okay. How many of us can think clearly when we're feeling deeply? Not many. They're the most difficult elements to bring together.
Well, I've got a second and third cusp on Cancer and Gemini rising. But
So you've got to learn about
I think
Cancer.
there's a communication thing coming in with Cancer. I mean, on the third house cusp.
Well, sure, yeah. But at the moment we're only dealing with that, 12th, 1st and 2nd.
Except that they're linked, aren't they? So you can't
The whole chart
think of
is
You can't think of two things at the same time.
No, that's what I said when I started. The whole chart, we cannot just take a section of it. But at the moment we have to stay within that framework. Otherwise we'll be dealing with all 12 houses.
Well, I've got Mercury and Venus on my ascendant in Gemini and my Sun in Cancer. So I find I can think quite clearly while being quite emotional at the same time. I mean,
Congratulations.
I can't do anything not emotionally, basically.
Depends how you feel at the
I
time.
had to integrate that, otherwise I wouldn't be able to see anything like that.
Yeah. Just to bring in that Gemini energy so that it's not so static. You really need to bring that in. But if we come in with Cancer rising, it's like, have you ever met a Cancer rising that can't out-talk and out-think any Gemini that you'd like to mention? Yakety, 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 yak. They go on and on and on. Especially when they're insecure. Their mind's going in a million different directions at once. They know that Gemini energy. It's there. It's unconscious, but it's there. They've already got that knowledge that they're drawing on. What the Cancer rising needs to do is to learn about family. Cancer rising doesn't know very much about family. And remember, we're only dealing with house cusps here. If you've got 16 million planets in Cancer, it's going to be different. But Cancer rising does not know about family. It's here to learn about family. It remembers very well the time in Gemini when it may not have stood still long enough to create any sort of family unit. Alright, so family is very important to your Cancer rising. If you've got Cancer rising, you'll protect and nurture and care. You'll respond to the family. You will respond to the family because it's so important to you. If you love those people around you, you will respond, you will nurture, you will care. Because it's very important to you. That's where you're drawing your security from, that family unit. Because you're so afraid of being drawn back to the more scattered energy of Gemini when maybe there wasn't a family unit. So what we're here to learn to do with Cancer rising is really get in touch with what family is all about. To bring in, to assimilate the mental air capacity of Gemini, the emotionality of Cancer, and the great ability and insight to really see into your own emotions and those of other people. To take that and combine it, to push it toward the deep creativity that can be Leo. Okay? They say Cancer can't let go. Check out Leos. Have you ever tried to take anything away from a Leo? I mean, really. But Cancer's just learning. And in a way, Cancer's a lot smarter than Gemini as far as that energy of fighting on verbal levels. Leo's smarter as far as actually taking things off you and keeping it, or keeping you from taking things off them that are theirs. But Cancer rising is smarter on the intellectual level. Alright? If we come in, they're moving toward that Leo, they're moving toward the creativity that's Leo. If we come in with Leo rising, there's a great possibility we've got some really deep karma with our family. Cancer on the 12th house card. There's a difficulty in letting go. That's our lesson if we've got Leo rising. Letting go of the difficulties with family and creating our own family unit. If any of you know, as I said, Leo rising and that energy of Leo, you can't take away anything that they think is theirs. They hoard more than the Cancer does. They keep the bits of string, the memory, the house, the old bottle. It's not the Cancer, it often is the Leo rising, because they remember a time when the deep insecurity of Cancer was there and the fear of anything they had to let go of. So it's interesting. Check out your Leo rising. So I love to do it every time I'm doing a consultation for someone with Leo rising, because they hoard. You know, bits of string of memory, an old photo from 18 years ago. The greatest one, I was reading a poem somewhere, it was in the Astrological Review. And it was actually aimed at Cancer, about where, did anyone read that? Where she was selling the house and the friend was helping her pack. It's in this one. The friend was helping her pack and there was all the trauma about what she'll get rid of and what she won't get rid of. The friend came back sometime later, she was still in the same house, she couldn't even bear to let go of the house. I mean, much less the packing. But I've seen that much, much more often with Leo rising. And it's that unconscious memory of the deep insecurity that is Cancer. With Leo rising, we're learning to establish our personality. We're learning to find our security in creating something for ourselves in some sort of fulfilling way. We've been through the sort of sensitivity of Cancer, and we remember well the pain. Thank you. This time with Leo rising, we're trying to establish that security within our own personality. It's different to the more pure energy of the sun. It's nowhere, we all know that, it's nowhere near as up front. We're just learning about it. We haven't learned how to do it yet. And if you've got Leo rising, one of the things you have to learn to do this time is find that confidence within yourself. And we all know that too. And we all know it's a lot easier for someone to stand up here and say than actually do. One thing that astrology has taught me is that we are all extremely vulnerable beings. We may be vulnerable in different areas to each other, but we are all very vulnerable. But if we've learned that Cancer vibration and we've coped and dealt with the deep sensitivity, we're ready to bring in the security that Leo can by creating that for ourselves. And what Leo rising is moving toward is taking that sensitivity of Cancer, the creativity of Leo, using it for a technique. It's how you deal with your Leos, by the way, is, just let them understand that by a technique they're going to have that creative energy flow. Be it a piano, be it whatever, they need the technique to channel it so that the creativity can flow. And that's what's going to happen when that progressed ascendant passes over that second house cusp. The Leo rising is going to learn what technique is all about. That's what makes the creativity flow. When I used to read about Virgo rising, it was of importance to me because I have Virgo rising, and I used to feel really there was something amiss about this service of Virgo rising, service to other people. And I thought about this and thought, there really is something behind this service. There's something behind Virgo rising, and there is. It's Leo. It's like Virgo rising only runs around doing errands for you because they think they can do it better than you anyway. Right? They think they can do it better than you. They want you to praise them. They want you to say they're terrific. But Leo on the 12th house cusp, it's like, God, I was recognised last time round, thank you very much. I was told I was great. Virgo rising's lesson this time around is to learn to be humble, and God is hard. It's like there's this energy. Virgo risings have problems with relationships because the sun rules the 12th house. Okay, masculine energy, there's male authority figures always if you've got Virgo rising, more so if you're a woman. So there's problems with relationships with Virgo rising. They haven't yet learned to balance them. Right? That's coming in Libra. It's not there yet. They've got to learn how to balance. So we've got the issue of, yes, I'll do it for you, but you please tell me I'm great. The one thing Virgo risings do very well is work in hospitals and such with patients, because patients all day long are telling them they could not do without them. Okay, check out how many Virgo risings you know that work in a situation like that. They are getting the acknowledgement and praise that they feel is automatically theirs. But there's the crippling shyness that comes in with Virgo rising, you see. There's a crippling shyness of, well, I know I've got the knowledge. And I know it's going to be okay, but do I have the technique? Have I yet learned it to put it forward? There's the unconscious surety there. If there's such a word, well, you know what I mean. It's there, but the crippling shyness that comes in with Virgo rising is also there. It's that learning to be humble, learning to deal with the ego, whatever that is, and learning to understand what relationships are all about, which they will do when they've moved onto Libra, when that progressed ascendant has passed over that second house cusp. Once that has happened, a Virgo rising in relationships knows how to give and take, bend and stretch, take the good times with the bad times better than any other sign. But there's usually a lot of pain before they get to that point, because they don't like being told what to do, which is something we don't really recognise normally with Virgo rising. And as I said, the other thing that's really important to remember is the male authority issues that come in if you've got Virgo rising, particularly if you're a woman. And the other area that's important to remember is going to say it. Is that right? The other thing that's important to remember with Virgo rising is with that sun ruling the 12th house, our vitality centre. It's going to be weakened very often throughout your life if you've got Virgo rising. It's very important to look after yourself. We tend to think of Virgo risings as being a bit hypochondriacal. It's far more Libra risings than Virgo. There's a lot of things that I'll talk about Libra rising, but it's not necessarily Virgo. The vitality centre is often weakened, and often you come in, if you've got Virgo rising, with some real health issues to deal with. but there's not the unconscious fear that you're going to get ill all the time. That's far more common with Libra. And as the Virgo rising moves toward Libra, as I said, the ability to deal with relationships is a lot more easily accessible. I'm still waiting. I've got another 3 years. How am I going to cope? So, what happens if we come in with Libra rising? There's no one more critical in the world than Libra rising. They do it very nicely and always with a smile on their face, but they are very, very critical. How many Libra risings do we have? It's really interesting to watch what they do, because when Libra rising is telling you to do something, and they do it all the time, believe me, they've done it so nicely. You don't even work out they've done it till after you've done whatever they wanted you to do. It's called manipulation. And they do it very nicely. But it's always with a smile. It's always very charmingly. There's no one more manipulative than the energy of Libra. But it's like what Libra is coming from is wanting that perfection. And please remember, I'm talking tongue-in-cheek some of the time. I mean it some of the time, and it's up to you to work out the difference. But when you come in with Libra rising, you're coming from dealing with perfection. Virgo on the 12th house cusp. So what happens when we're striving for perfection and want to balance things? Nothing. The greatest fence sitters for your Libra rising. It's not necessarily your Librans. The energy of Libra. Your Libra risings will fence sit. Because how can they create perfection or bring in perfection and always see two sides of things and want to balance? Okay, so they're moving towards Scorpio. They'll be able to do it, but for a while there they really do fence it, because if they go one way or the other, they're not going to get the balance and perfection that they want. Libra risings have their own hassle with relationships because of the very same reasons. They want perfection. Okay, it's not really the idealism that we often put on it. It's more that they're looking for that perfection that they strove so hard for at some other time. So they're learning to relate, they're learning to take the usefulness of what they learned in Virgo. And remember, if we're looking at Virgo, it's the technique and it's the need to be needed that's important in Virgo. Alright? So, and the usefulness. Is it useful? If it's not useful, I don't want it. Well, that's great when you're talking about relationships. It makes us feel very insecure. So as they're moving through Libra, they're learning to balance all that. They're learning to relate on those levels, and they're moving towards Scorpio. Okay, so they're moving toward learning to manipulate their own life, learning to deal with the intensity, the passion, and the one-to-one relating that is Scorpio. That's what they're moving toward. But it's going to be some time till they get there. When you come in with Scorpio rising, you've got Libra on the 12th house cusp. You don't want to relate to 1 million people if you've got Scorpio rising. You've done all that, thank you very much. I don't want to share anymore. I want to relate on that deep soul level, that deep soul union that is Scorpio. I don't want to share. Scorpio rising is very possessive for that very reason. They want to learn about passion. They want to learn about intensity. They want to learn about soul unions. They've done the sharing bit in Libra. This time they're learning the intensity of Scorpio. They're learning what Scorpio is all about, and there's only one word you ever have to remember when you're talking about Scorpio, and that's trust. Who can I trust? That's what they're learning. If I can trust you, I'll die for you. You betray that trust. You betray it. Far more common with a Scorpio rising. If I was to know I was going to be attacked, I would want a Scorpio rising around, thank you, that had really dealt with that and moved through to the Sag second house cusp. Because they will protect you with their life if they've dealt with that Scorpionic energy. I wouldn't want running around that didn't like me and throw you under the subway train. But they do, they protect, and that's what they're learning. They're learning about trust. They're learning about the deep bonds that we establish in Scorpio, about the deep instinctual blood bonds that are established. but we're just learning with the rising sign. If we've got our sun Scorpio, we're far more in touch with our energy. With Scorpio rising, we're just learning about it. And we're learning about what it can mean to be bonded on that level. It's taking the energy of Libra, which can be very strongly creating social units. That's what the energy of Libra is so good at. Mediating, arbitration, bringing people together that are in disharmony. You watch that Libra energy at work, it's really interesting if you can just detach and watch it work. Bringing groups together and creating that network is very, very Libra. In Scorpio, we're learning to do it on a more one-to-one level. And it's taking that sort of those social networks that we've created in Libra and making it more on a it's real blood brother stuff. It's very tribal. Okay, that's what we're learning if we've got Scorpio rising. And we're moving towards Sagittarius, which is to let go. How do we do that? If we've just learned to sort of have a one-to-one deep, intense soul union, and now someone's telling us we have to learn to let go. We're telling ourselves we have to learn to let go. It's a very painful lesson for Scorpio rising. It's like, on the one hand, I don't want to share because I've been there. I want to create this deep one-to-one relationship. By the time that progressive ascendant moves over the second house, they're having to learn issues of letting go. And that's a very painful one. It's like Scorpio rising is learning about commitment. And once that commitment's made, it's only severed under severe stress. Scorpio is a very misunderstood sign. It's like people tend to think of Scorpio as very ruthless, of just cutting and running and never looking back. Scorpio, that energy of Scorpio, it's almost like they go through the dying first. Judy Collins sings a wonderful, wonderful song. And one of the lines in it is, "I've done enough dying today." I don't know anything about her chart, but I'm sure she's got very heavy Scorpionic influences in it. So what they have to learn to do is recognise that we can become enmeshed in that web that is Scorpio. The Scorpio energy web spins. It spins web. And what can happen is we can get trapped in our own web. So we're moving towards Sagittarius, and what does Sagittarius do with webs? It's about tearing them apart. A very painful lesson to learn for the Scorpio rising. To let go. So what happens when we come in with Sag rising? Well, you hear about Sag risings that they're freedom-loving, that they're independent, that they're all of these sorts of things, and they are to a certain degree, but it's almost like, I want my freedom. They still remember the Scorpionic control over their partner. So it's like, I will have my freedom, thank you, but you, I would rather stay right where you are, just in case I want to come back. You know, that energy of Sag rising, Sagittarius, the energy of Sagittarius does not mind a rope. This is what I've always said about Sagittarius. They do not mind a rope as long as it's a very long rope. Alright? Sag rising does not want the rope at all. That's the difference. Because they remember, they don't want to be drawn back to that more negative bondage that can be Scorpio. When it, oh, thank you very much. When it's like, you know, we sort of Sagittarius only open their mouth to change feet and that sort of thing. If it's the energy of the, I know that one really well. If it's the energy, the sun energy, which is the more pure energy, there's not any sort of malice normally behind it. Okay, it doesn't offend people. But if it's Sagittarius rising, it's coming from Scorpio. So the truth is often more caustic, it's more sarcastic, it's more flung with poison arrows if you've got Sagittarius rising. Because it's there from Scorpio. And it can be very, very caustic. Another thing we think about Sag rising. How many Sag risings do we have? Please don't press. I suddenly realised my friend was sitting to my left and I'm going to die later. They can be the most opinionated, dogmatic rising sign there is. It's true. Because it's coming from Scorpio. Sag risings here to learn about wisdom, and they will. Okay, so just listen to their friends. They're here to learn about wisdom. But they keep coming back. And the other thing is, most people see them as upfront, friendly, out there. Nothing of the sort. Most Sag risings are very reclusive. They need their space. They can turn it on for you, but they need their space. They need their privacy. They need their secrecy. Try to get a secret, a real in-depth secret out of a Sag rising. I've always said it's one of the most effective rising signs there is. When a Sag rising starts to talk, you can bet your bottom dollar they are steering you right away from anything that's going on with them. Okay? It's sort of like the Gemini rising or the Cancer rising, but instead of the sort of just yak, it's a deliberate attempt to steer you away from what's going on within them. They're here to learn what that Sagittarian energy is. They're here to learn to take that harnessed power that is Scorpio. If we just think of the centaur, the centaur and the arrow, the centaur representing Scorpio, the harnessed power that Scorpio, and the arrow pointed at 45 degrees. Pointed at 45 degrees if we draw it properly, which I never do, but it's pointed at 45 degrees to get the maximum efficiency and expediency. That's what the arrow is at 45 degrees for. And that's what Sagittarius is here to learn. It's just learning that Sag rising. It's learning about efficiency. It's learning to take what they know and give it the ideal of Sagittarius. And then it'll move toward Capricorn, taking that ideal that is Sagittarius, taking the ethics that is Sagittarius, and turning it into the form and structure that is Capricorn. Excuse me, my throat's giving out. So basically, that's what I want to say about the Sag rising, is don't think they're out there and very social, because if they are normally, unless they've got a heavy something else to back it up, they're far more secretive than we know about. That's what they've got to learn, to let go of that secrecy, to let go of so much need for privacy that they remember so well from Scorpio. To let go of it and trust more and be more open, because Sag rising normally isn't open, just that energy by itself. They're moving toward Capricorn, so when you're out for dinner and your Sag rising says, "I'll pay," it's often not out of the generosity of their heart. It's often more out of, that knowledge that they're moving toward Capricorn, they're doing the right thing, as they believe. Okay, and there's a difference. There's a difference between that sort of, I'll pay, Jupiterian energy, and doing it because you believe it's the right thing to do. And the Sag rising normally does it because they're moving toward that Capricornian energy and believing it's the right thing to do, and they want people's approval. It's very important for a Sag rising to have approval, moving toward that Capricorn. And once they're there, the insecurity around that generally diminishes greatly. How are we going for time? Good to time. That's all. Thank you. Goodbye. That's all right, David. See you later. So what happens? David's got Scorpio rising. Me and he's out. By the time the lecture's over, I'll have a friend in the room. That's all right. I'm having a Neptune transit. What do I know? But so what happens is that just remember what that Sag energy is doing. That's all that's important. And that's okay, that's who we are. That's one of the most important things astrology can give us, is that it's okay to be who we are. We don't have any choice really, do we, as astrologers and people mixing in personal growth areas. Every time we tend to do something, someone else jumps on us. One of our friends says, yes, but look, why are you attracting this situation to yourself, or why are you having such a rotten time? What is it in yourself? We're all into the projection bit. We don't have a chance to sit and whinge. We're getting over that. We're getting back into the blame. We're through the projection. I'm more into now, we've been through so much and most of it was your fault. Because it's like we don't get a chance, so we're constantly pushed to grow and to be more aware of who we are, and to recognise that, we might go through stages where we think the whole world is beating up on us. And maybe that's true at the time. If that's what we're putting out, somebody out there will oblige us. So we may go through times like that. We may go through times where we think it's everybody else's fault but our own. But it's really important to remember that it's okay to be who we are, and most of us are doing our best. I think sometimes what happens, we get into these personal growth areas and we beat ourselves up a lot, that we're not doing well enough. You know, we're doing this and we had that and we have this knowledge and we have that knowledge, and we really do beat ourselves up and think we're not doing well enough. It's okay and perfect to be who we are and where we are right at this moment in time. And that we only ever come from where we're coming from at that moment, and that's all we can ask of ourselves. It's the same as if, you know, somebody says to you something, you don't have to own it. If somebody says, look, you know, Glenys, that was a really terrible lecture. I mean, I've never been so bored in all my life. I can take the thing and I could cry. There's a few things I could do. I could just cry. I could think, is it true? I could really go into myself and ask if it's true, and if it is, thank you for telling me. Okay? But you don't have to accept it. I could then think, well, I think it's okay, so if you didn't get anything from it, that's where you are at the moment. So where we are is okay. And it's really important that we're aware of where we are, but not to beat ourselves up. And that we are moving forward all the time. So that when I swing off at the rising signs and that sort of thing, you know, I did it with Virgo too, remember. It's important to have a bit of fun, because in my opinion, that's the way we learn most. Sometimes at conferences, in classes and that type of thing, it's very important to get into the correct knowledge. It's very important to have the correct technique. It's very important to have all of these things, but if we can't inject a bit of humour, we're not going to learn a whole lot or touch a whole lot of people or even really acknowledge who we are. Okay? So it's important to keep that in mind when we sometimes laugh at ourselves. And sometimes when I laugh at you too. And I've gone right off the track, and I did warn you that I was having an and I wasn't even looking out the window. Capricorn, that's it. I must tell you something funny that happened to me while I was away. I promise I'll get back to Capricorn, right? But I did something when I was away that was the most amazing thing ever happened to me when I've been lecturing. I was doing a workshop, and I did it 2 weekends in a row in different cities. And the first weekend I did it, I came to Venus in Virgo. I'd done Venus in Taurus, Venus in Capricorn. I forgot Venus in Virgo. I totally forgot it. Now I have Virgo rising, which by relocation I do not, so obviously I was anxious to get rid of it. But I forgot Virgo. So that was all right. The people sort of pulled me up and said, you forgot Venus in Virgo, and that was fine. And then the next weekend I did it, and not only did I forget, but when they pulled me up on it, I came back to write the glyph and couldn't even remember what the glyph of Virgo looked like. I stood up here and there I was with something like, 40 people at a workshop in a strange country, and my mind just went zip. And so I stood there and I just turned around, so I seem to be having some sort of breakdown up here and nobody even cares. I couldn't even remember what the glyph of Virgo looked like. There was a very deep message in that for me. But anyway, that's Neptune. But if we come in with Capricorn rising, we are not chasing, as I said earlier in my introduction, we are not chasing freedom, we know it. It's not an issue for us. We've been there. Capricorn rising when we're young can be far more irresponsible and unwilling to take on any sort of responsibility or commitment than any Sagittarius energy. Because we remember unconsciously that we've been there. We want, in a way, with Capricorn rising, to go back. We're learning about responsibility, about commitment, about taking the ideals and ethics of Sag and turning it into form and structure. And there's part of us, that wants to go back to the more freedom-loving, freewheeling Sagittarian energy that we knew at some point. That we've come in with some sort of innate understanding of what it really is. So it's very difficult for us to learn to be responsible with Capricorn rising. And it doesn't happen until much later. But Capricorn rising's here, it's much softer in a way than with Sagittarius or Sag rising. It does offend people at times because it's coming from Scorpio, so it can seem to be very caustic. Alright? But with Capricorn rising, basically it's softer in a way. They don't offend people so much, but there's still the directness because they've learned that Sagittarian energy, they've learned that Sagittarian directness, that Sagittarian upfrontedness, but they're softening it in Capricorn. It's with more reserve. So it's much softer in that way, and it's in some ways can be less offensive. With Capricorn rising, we're taking that, we're turning it into something, as I said before, taking that efficiency that we're learning in Sag, giving it structure and form, and learning about sensitivity. Very, very sensitive. If you've got Capricorn rising, learning about sensitivity. And what I always say with anyone with any heavy Capricornian energy, massage, touch, feel, reach out and touch. It stops all that Saturnian wall that we build around ourselves. It's so easy to get through. It's so easy to get through that Capricornian reserve. All we've got to do is reach out and touch, and it crumbles those Saturnian walls. What we're doing with Capricorn rising is really learning what that sensitivity is all about. A very deeply sensitive sign is Capricorn. So we're just learning about it with Capricorn rising. Now, as we often find with Capricorn rising, as they get older, you'll often find them soften, you'll find them mellow, you'll find them getting involved in group activities. They're moving toward Aquarius. They take very often group leadership roles. Very, very important to them because A, they're taking what they've learned from Sagittarius and Capricorn, and they're moving toward that revolutionary energy that can be Aquarius, breaking down outmoded structures and form. No one can do it quite so well as you that's all right, I'll just cry. As your Capricorn rising. Alright? So it's just, and then moving toward that Aquarius, you'll often find Capricorn risings later in life getting into that more group endeavours, but as a leader. Alright? And let's get in here and do it properly. Let's get some organisation into this group. It's all falling apart. There's things everywhere. I mean, it's so scattered. Nobody knows what anybody else is doing. Let's get it together and organise it. It's probably because they just can't stand it. They feel they have to get in there and do it themselves, but do it they do. If you come in with Aquarius rising, I mean really Aquarius rising is dealing with an unconscious need to be accepted, to be acknowledged, to be approved of. They're coming from Capricorn. So what's happening is that they're coming from that deep need to be approved of. They're dealing with the assimilation of the humanitarianism that can be Aquarius. And where are they going? No wonder it's difficult for them. They're moving toward that fog and haziness and whatever of Pisces. So it's like when we come in with Aquarius rising, we're really coming in with the knowledge that we were there. Approval was important to us. Acknowledgement was important to us. Having people think we were doing the right thing was important to us. Suddenly we've got to break all that down with Aquarius rising. There's enormous fear comes in with that. Capricorn, I know it's a cardinal sign. It is very fixed. It's very difficult and painful for Capricornian energy to change anything. Okay, they'll have the ideas of changing it, but please don't try to let it touch me. They'll throw the ideas out there, but change is very difficult for Capricorn. So what we're doing, we're coming in with Aquarius rising, we've got to learn to scrap all that. We know it, we've been there, we learned it. Now we've got to learn to break it down and assimilate new ideas, new trends, learn what humanitarian movements are all about, and learn that they will. They're moving toward Pisces. They'll bring in the sensitivity, and Aquarius rising, I think, is really more in touch with the feeling spaces than the other two air signs, because it's like somehow they're really aware right from the start of what they're moving into. Like Pisces rising, as I'll get your nose, it's all about to end anyway. But Aquarius rising, as it's moving toward Pisces, has some innate, that it's like, again, combining that mental foresight, which could be Aquarius, with the knowledge of what's coming in Pisces. So it's like, okay, I learned it all there, the structure, the form. I've got to break it all down here and lose it all there. We underestimate sometimes just what our ascendant, that point that we call the ascendant, what we're really going through is we go through those three houses, the three house cusps. So they're moving toward Pisces. If we come in with Pisces rising, have you ever met a Pisces rising that isn't bossy, dogmatic? They do it very nicely, very sweetly. We think they're really super sweet, and in 10 minutes' time they've got us doing exactly what they want to do, playing the role they have set for us and the stage they have set, and we're playing it out and we don't even know. And when they've changed us into that role, they'll go and do it to someone else. And it's sort of like, I don't understand, you're not the person I first met. You know, they really do cast us in a role. Now it's the chameleon, we all know that, but it's coming from the control, if you like, of Aquarius, the dogmatism that can be Aquarius, the fixity that is certainly Aquarius, and the stubbornness. It has learned all that very well. So what we bring in with Pisces is we're learning about sensitivity, we're learning the all-encompassing, not your Cancer sensitivity. What is it? Cancer protects, Scorpio attacks, Pisces forgives. All right, so it's not the protection or the protectiveness of Cancer or Scorpio. It's the more all-encompassing forgiveness that we're learning in Pisces. The universal love. That's what we're moving toward if we've got Aquarius rising. And it's interesting to watch as Aquarius risings get older, they very much get more into things like dream therapy, into things like anything that deals with symbolism, tarot, that type of thing, as they're moving toward that Pisces second house cusp. Was I just talking about Pisces rising? I thought I was. Well, anyway. It's okay. Keeps you on your toes. I thought a couple of you were going to sleep, so I just threw it in. Anyway, you know what I mean. And it's true, I just forgot to say it in Aquarius. So with Pisces rising, what we're moving toward again is the start of a whole new cycle. Okay, with Aquarius rising, we know Pisces is coming. With Pisces rising, we know it's all going to end anyway. We know it's going to end. We know there has to be completion. It's like the balsamic moon phase. If any of you have got that or Pisces rising, you know you're in a state of constant change. Nothing's ever the same. And there's always the fear, the unconscious fear, that it's going to go away. Now it's very difficult for us to have anything in our lives if we always have this unconscious fear pattern that it's going to disappear. And that's very much what we do if we've got Pisces rising. Okay, or the balsamic moon, so that's another lecture altogether. But it's like this knowledge that it's all going to end, that everything has to end before we can start again in Aries. How many Pisces risings do we have? Do you have that feeling? Oh, I suppose you're all going to say no. Does anyone want to share what they feel about that? Because that can be a really difficult one to deal with.
I'd say you're spot on as far as I'm concerned. That's just how I feel, and I am getting into tarot and symbolism and
And is that really helping you sort of with that knowledge that it's all completion in any way, you know? But it's very difficult. The unconscious fear is enormous. And also Pisces rising, of course. What do you want me to be, and I'll be it. You know, it's very difficult for us to learn about that energy when we're totally taking on what we feel the world wants us to be, and that they never see us clearly as we are anyway. And we never project clearly who we are anyway. So that Pisces rising can bring in a lot of pain. What I've done is deal with the Ascendant. We could just as easily do it with the Midheaven. We could just as easily do it with the IC. Or the Descendant, 6th, 7th, 8th. What I suggest you do if you're at all interested is just to use those models. Go home and use them. You know, see what you come up with. Because when we get into astrology, it's really important. With today's technology, it's very easy for us to, and it's wonderful, we can get into all sorts of new techniques and this and that, and put all sorts of different things in the chart. And we do, all of us do. Anyone that's got a computer does. But what I think sometimes we tend to get away from is the basic knowledge that's right there in front of us, or the basic information that we've got at our fingertips. If we'll just look at it and use it. If I'm going to believe that astrology is about cycles, and if I'm going to believe in cycles, I have to believe in reincarnation. I have to believe that there's a microcosm within the macrocosm. So it's all an ongoing process. So it's like when we're dealing with any of these, as I said at the start of the lecture, we're just dealing with one area, but it could just as easily be applied, say, to the 9th, 10th, 11th house, like Libra, Scorpio, Sag, what the 9th is about, the midheaven, where we're going with the 11th house. And just take it home and see what you come up with. Are there any questions?
Yes, does it matter how many degrees the ascendant is in any one sign?
No. Of course, well, it depends what we're talking about. Just as far as what I'm talking about this lecture, it's just the energy of that sign. But as the progressed ascendant moves through, it makes a difference, because that depends on how long that's taking. All right, so if you've got an intercepted first house, you're going to spend a lot of time before you get to that second house cusp, before you sort of really assimilate the energy of the second house cusp, that sign.
What if your first house and second house cusps are the same? You're going to get through it quicker?
Well, it tends to suggest that yes, that you'll move through it, but you're still going to move through it at the same time, but you really got to learn it. I mean, you really will learn that energy by the time you get through with the two house cusps, yeah.
What happens if 12th and the first house is the same?
Well, same thing, except I think more that there's something left over from the past, right? Like something has to be completed and left over from the past. It's going to mean that you're going to be dealing with the sign on your ascendant a lot sooner, right? Almost from the start, because on the 12th house cusp as well. Sort of like you flunked last time round, sorry.
What happens if you've got the 29 degrees of the ascendant? So you really just follow that one?
Yeah, but I still believe that it is that ascendant, and it's still going to be until it gets to that second house cusp.
Doesn't take so long. Shouldn't take so long.
No. Well, that's right, and that's what it's all about. How long it's going to take you, and how much you learn you need to learn about that energy. Somebody else has their hand up?
Excuse me, what if you've got a planet conjuncture ascendant? Will that really change?
Sure, we all know that if you've got a planet on an angle, it's going to radically change the energy of that ascendant, and it's going to cover up to a certain degree what the energy of that ascendant is. If you've got, say, Pluto on the ascendant, no matter what sign it is, it's sort of, say you've got Libra rising, you're going to come across more as a Scorpio rising. Okay? So it depends what it is, but sure, if there's a planet there, that's going to really, it's going to cover up the energy to a degree. Might be much more difficult for you to get in touch with what the energy of your ascendant is, because Pluto's sitting on it. But as we all know too, with Pluto that will happen. You know, you might not like it, but it will happen.
What happens to the ruler of the 12th house?
Oh, actually, that's another thing I was going to say. So, thank you. Look to, when that second house cusp, look to where the ruler falls in the chart. Most important part of the lecture, and I was about to leave it out. Look to where the ruler of the second house cusp falls in the chart, and that's where you're going to learn most about that energy. That's where it will be played out. That's where it will be most easily accessible to you, except if it's in the 12th. Well, if you've got, say, if you've got Scorpio on the second house cusp and Pluto in the 12th, all right, the ruler of the second's in the 12th. So it's going to be, it's more or less you just go around in circles. It's going to be much more difficult for you because it's but again, always remember the more positive energy. It's like, you know where you're going. You've been there. So, you know, that's the more positive side of it.
Go back to your pool party.
What's that wonderful saying? If I could only go back to the start. Does anyone know that? If I could go back to the start and something like, go through it all, go back to the start and know where I began. Or something, a saying that goes to something like that?
Only I could be 16 again and know what I know.
It's the same sort of thing, but this is a far more profound saying that I can't remember. How I deal with profound statements in my life. But yes, and that's really what it's all about. You know, particularly if that ruler's in the 12th. Anything else?
Yes, what is the ruler the ruler of the 12th house is conjuncting things?
Well, what it means is you're going to be pushed more and more to deal with it. You know, like, and it depends what that ruler is, how that's going to happen. You know, if it's Neptune, well, Go and see the never-ending story. But, you know, it just depends what it is. If it's Saturn, you're going to learn it that way. If it's Uranus, it's going to be with a bang, you know. It just depends what the energy is. Yeah, well, it's sort of just like the energy is different. Just take whatever sign, whatever planet it is, and that's how it's going to play out. But if you've got Uranus on the Ascendant, it's probably your ruling planet anyway, so, you know, that's going to influence your whole chart, as is any planet on an angle.
Say if you had Aries on the cusp of the second and Pisces rising, and say if Mars is a ruler of second house cusp, okay, you throw that into the first house, that would have to be really pretty strong.
Yeah, yeah. And remember, this is what I said, we always have to take into account everything we're looking at. But if there's nothing there, it can give us a lot of vital information about that person. You know how we tend to sort of, if there's nothing in a house, sometimes we can really, you know, just skip over it. We could at times be skipping over vital information. We don't underestimate something like Saturn or Pluto or Uranus and where it's sitting. Sometimes we can underestimate other things in the chart. And just like that sequential house cusps, I think is one of them that we do underestimate a lot. Anyway, I'll leave that with you, and thank you very much.